Are you living a meaningful life? What is a meaningful life? Let us ask the wisest man in Athens, Socrates, as a jury decides whether he should live.
Athens was split into two factions, the aristocratic faction and the democratic faction. With Spartan support, the aristocrats, oligarchs, took control of Athens. A few years later, the Democrats regained control. Men fought for and against democracy, bitterly and to the death. When democracy won, the fate of Socrates was decided. He was the intellectual leader of the aristocrats. He was the corrupter of youths drunk with debate. It would be better, said Anytus and Meletus, that Socrates should die.
The rest of the story all the world knows, for Plato wrote it down in prose more beautiful than poetry. We are privileged to read for ourselves that simple and courageous, if not legendary, apology or defense, in which the first martyr of philosophy proclaimed the rights and necessity of free thought.
How have you felt, O men of Athens, at hearing the speeches of my accusers? I cannot tell, but I know that their persuasive words almost made me forget who I was. Such was the effect of them. And yet, they have hardly spoken a word of truth. But, many as their falsehoods were, there was one of them which quite amazed me. I mean, when they told you to be upon your guard and not to let yourselves be deceived by the force of my eloquence. They ought to have been ashamed of saying this because they were sure to be detected as soon as I opened my lips and displayed my deficiency. Unless, by the force of eloquence, they mean the force of truth, for then I do indeed admit that I am eloquent, but in how different a way from theirs.
Socrates says that his only eloquence is due to the force of truth. The Greeks called this virtue parrhesia, speaking the truth even when the stakes are high. Socrates faces death, and yet he holds fast to the truth.
A man who is good for anything ought not to calculate the chance of living or dying. He ought only to consider whether in doing anything he is doing right or good, acting the part of a good man or of a bad. Rather than fearing death, Achilles feared to live in dishonor and not to avenge his friend. Let me die next, he replies, and be avenged of my enemy, rather than abide here by beaked ships, a scorn and a burden of the earth. Had Achilles any thought of death and danger? For wherever a man's place is, whether the place which he has chosen or that in which he has been placed by a commander, there he ought to remain in the hour of danger. He should not think of death or anything but of disgrace. If, I say, now, when, as I conceive and imagine, God orders me to fulfill the philosopher's mission of searching into myself and other men, I were to desert my post through fear of death or any other fear, that would indeed be strange. Men of Athens, I honor and love you, but I shall obey God rather than you. And while I have life and strength, I shall never cease from the practice and teaching of philosophy. I will exhort anyone saying, "Oh, my friend, why do you, who are a citizen of the great and mighty and wise city of Athens, care so much about laying up the greatest amount of money and honor and reputation, and so little about wisdom and truth and the greatest improvement of the soul which you never regard or heed at all? Are you not ashamed of this?" And if the person with whom I'm arguing says, "Yes, but I do care," I do not depart or let him go at once. I interrogate and examine and cross-examine him. And if I think he has no virtue but only says that he has, I reproach him with undervaluing the greater and overvaluing the less. And this I should say to everyone whom I meet, young and old, citizen and alien, for this is the command of God, as I would have you know. And I believe that to this day, no greater good has ever happened in the state than my service to God. For I do nothing but go about persuading you all, old and young alike, not to take thought for your persons and your property, but first and chiefly to the care about the greatest improvement of the soul. I tell you that virtue is not given by money, but that from virtue come money and every other good of man, public as well as private. This is my teaching, and if this is the doctrine which corrupts the youth, my influence is ruinous indeed. The greatest good of man is daily to converse about virtue, and all that concerning which you hear me examining myself and others, and that the life which is unexamined is not worth living. If you kill me, you will not easily find another like me, who, if I may use such a ludicrous figure of speech, am a sort of gadfly given to the state by the god. The state is like a great and noble steed who is tardy in his motions owing to his very size and requires to be stirred into life. I am that gadfly which God has given the state, and all day long and in all places am always fastening upon you, arousing and persuading and reproaching you. And as you will not find another like me, I would advise you to spare me. I dare say that you may feel irritated at being suddenly wakened when you are caught napping.
The jury found Socrates guilty. He upheld his value to the state and refused to beg for mercy from the crowd whom he had always contemned. They had the power to pardon him. He disdained to make the appeal. Woe to him who teaches men faster than they can learn.